Welcome to another episode of Hemp Barons. I'm Dan Humiston, and on today's show, Joy travels to the north, to Canada, to talk hemp genetics with one of the world's leading authorities. They talk about how the genetics have changed and improved over the years and what we should expect in the future. Let's join Joy's conversation with Jeff Kostuik from Hemp Genetics International.
Well, welcome to Hemp Barons. Thank you for being with us today, Jeff.
My pleasure, Joy.
Now, you are a contributor to the reemergence of this hemp crop on a global scale of such epic proportions, I'm not quite even sure how to describe it. The knowledge base that you have acquired since being, in Manitoba, before you even began your career with Hemp Production Services and Hemp Genetics International, you'd had a 26-year career serving the government of Manitoba in regenerative conservation practices, starting out as a soil technician in 1989. And then when the regulation of the hemp crop began federally in Canada in 1998, you were basically put in charge of the research happening in that province, which of course is the heart in so many ways of the hemp movement in North America. Explain to us what it was like for you in 1998 when the crop was federally legalized in Canada and you were told, okay, you're now going to deal with hemp. What was that like for you, Jeff?
It was quite neat, I guess you could say, is the easiest way to put it. But we had, as always, we always tend to struggle with our regular commodities, and particularly where we're from here in Canada, we don't grow a lot of corn or soybeans yet, and it's really a small rotation that we have to work with. And so part of the interest and re-interest in growing hemp was that it could be grown in the area of the province where we're from, which has a very short growing season. And I guess beginning at that point, I think the world in general, we know so much more about cannabis these days and the health benefits and the nutritional benefits. But at that time, I guess there was still a lot of uncertainty with knowing whether it was hemp or marijuana. And essentially there was a distinct line drawn in the sand that kind of made sure that those two things were separate. So we still call it the giggle factor, where when we would go to farm shows and start talking about hemp, there would still be the comment, well, if I roll it up into a bale and smoke it, am I going to get high? And so, it took a lot of time to sort of get around that stigma. But, once accepted, farmers really took to the crop, and it changed the landscape substantially in just a short period of time.
Now, Canada then very quickly made itself the global leader in, well, quick as hemp goes, Jeff, we all know hemp isn't in much of a hurry, even though everybody else is. But as hemp goes, Canada very quickly made itself the global leader in hemp grain processing and bulk hemp food ingredients. Can you tell us how that industry evolved versus fiber varieties, for example? And then we can get into the extract here in a moment. But no one in Canada, of course, until the passage of the Cannabis Act last year, no hemp farmers could extract the flowering tops and leaves and resins. In fact, as we know, all of those parts of the plant, even the bracts around the seed, needed to be left on farm and were not touchable. So in the beginning, those were the two choices, fiber and grain. How was the choice made? How did that evolve?
Yeah, so essentially, I guess just as the U.S. is going through now, trying to bring varieties from Europe and from Canada to be trialed, that's essentially how we started off in Canada. We brought in a lot of varieties from Europe, and I would say mainly from Europe, but they were destined, or they were bred for sort of high fiber varieties, or so lots of biomass, but there wasn't a lot known, I don't think, at that particular time on the nutritional value of the hemp seed. And kudos go off and hats go off to two of the pioneers in learning much about the food product, and that's Mike Fata of Manitoba Harvest and Sean Crew of Hemp Oil Canada. And back when I began, I worked closely or fairly closely with these gentlemen as far as learning about the agronomy and how to grow the crop successfully for grain. And those individuals certainly took the bull by the horns and, I'm not going to say exploited, but made consumers aware of the nutritional value that this crop has. And so what happened from that point on is that the breeding programs within Canada saw these tall varieties that were high grain yielders. How could we make it easier for farmers to harvest with their conventional equipment and not have as many burning combines or issues with wrapping? And so a company like Hemp Genetics, like ourselves, we took that large seed head and just got it closer to the ground, which increases what we call the harvest index. And so making farmers happier and being able to handle the crop more efficiently was a natural way that we were actually able to increase yields with both genetics and just learning how to handle the crop. So that's essentially how I would say it happened in Canada. And in Manitoba alone, this area was and still is a very prominent hemp growing area. So the experience that the growers had was attractive for the processors, and that's why the majority of the processing started off in Manitoba. And I guess with the work that we were doing at that point, I was working for the Parkland Crop Diversification Foundation, and that's where we supported the industry. It was a good time. Everybody moving towards the same direction and moving the industry forward.
And your colleague, my mentor and colleague, Andrea Herman, who we've had on the show here, was just talking, of course, about Parkland Crop Diversification and her internship. And talk for a moment, and then I'm excited for the listeners to learn about Hemp Genetics International and hemp production services. But I know that research is close to your heart. You love this plant. There are a few people in the world that love this plant as much as I do, and I know you do. Could we talk about the importance of research right now? And I know it's a big topic, so feel free to narrow it down to the pieces that you think are most important. But why is folks want this sort of plug and play? Oh, we're just going to take this hemp plant and plug it in here. Take hemp and make it into paper at this paper factory, or these textiles, or this grain processing facility. But hemp is unique in every single way, and research is so important. Could you elaborate on that for us?
Sure. And yeah, absolutely. It's the research part is quite dear to my heart. And as we move the interest, I guess, of our genetics into the U.S., that was part of my mission or goal in life, was to align myself with as many research institutes to take essentially the risk and the questions that farmers will have in a local area on how to grow the crop successfully. So just as it is with every crop, hemp and different varieties do better in different locations. And it's important for farmers to be able to get local data that will reflect how the plant will perform in their area. So in a nutshell, everything on the agronomy side of things, as far as the planting rate, the planting date, fertility, and what soils to plant into, is extremely important for every producer to know. And no one variety is going to be the answer for all. And so that's why the variety testing that we take part in, it's a multi-state trial in the U.S. And other trials located throughout the country that we can participate in, is very important to make me a better agronomist, so that I can provide better information and really take some of the risk out of the growers who haven't had the opportunity or the experience to work with the crop yet. So getting that filtered down, and that was my role prior to Hemp Genetics, was an extension. So extending that information to farmers was and still is extremely important for me.
And the contributions that you have made in that respect, and in fact that you still continue to, and that's a perfect segue, moving in now to Hemp Genetics International. Talk about research. Breeding unique, distinct, stable varieties that have a high nutritional profile, that will produce an excellent yield, that of course are far, far below the 0.3% THC threshold. Hemp Genetics International comes into the world. And we get folks coming out of retirement, your colleagues, with this great interest in this plant. Can you tell us a little bit about the very unique and scholarly and accomplished team that you lead, that you co-lead at Hemp Genetics International, and even the experience around pulse crops?
Sure. So, yeah, Hemp Genetics is really a farmer-based organization, I guess, or company. We have, I believe we've got 9 professional agronomists on our team, working throughout. And as we mentioned, Andrea is a professional agronomist, and she's works in our sales. But the experience that the core members, I guess, of the company have had initially were from the practical side of things and the experience in growing the crop. And so a lot of the information that we provide is just that. It's practical and from our own experience. Along with that, we've got what is probably the world's perhaps most famous lentil breeder, Bert Vandenberg, Dr. Bert Vandenberg, who leads our breeding team, and now we have a fresh young face in the crowd, out of the crowd, I guess. Dr. Jessica Hughes also coming on board. So we have a lot of experience in the breeding side of things on multiple different crops, and it is something that we're looking at to diversify a little bit more too with hemp genetics, is to look at a lot of different protein crops for the industry, and including faba beans, and that work great in the rotation with hemp. They supply some much needed nitrogen, particularly for organic situations. So we're looking at sort of a full spectrum, and for full sustainability, I guess, is another great buzzword that's often used, but it's really part of what we'd like to see sort of in the landscape, and putting more tools in the farmer's toolbox to make them more successful. And so it does take a lot of work, and feel quite fortunate to be involved with the team that I am, to be involved with such knowledgeable people in each of their silos.
Indeed, and we know, of course, that hemp loves nitrogen. We were shouting from the rooftops in the 90s, and I apologize for this, that it doesn't take any inputs, and it grows everywhere, and it doesn't take water. It's the miracle plant. And of course, some spindly form of hemp will surely grow somehow in the Sahara Desert. But when we're talking about agriculture, we're talking about, growing for yield. And it's a hungry crop, and different climates, different soils, certainly take different amounts of nitrogen and the other nutrients that hemp requires, potassium, sulfur, and of course, so using a rotation with nitrogen fixing crops such as legumes or pulse crops is so important and healthy. And Hemp Genetics International, the breeders there also are coming from pulse crops and are responsible, I think, for quite a few certified pedigreed varieties of pulse crops in the world before coming into hemp. Is that right?
That's true, yes. And I guess that was my association with Dr. Vandenberg initially, is when I worked as an applied research specialist in Manitoba. And we were doing work with lentils, faba beans, other pulse crops, as mentioned, peas. And it's obvious, as you mentioned, Joy, that hemp can grow in just about any place, just as most plants can. But to make a crop of it and to be successful and to be basically to pay the bills, we have to try to treat this crop as best we can to maximize its genetic potential. And by feeding it well and taking care of it from the get-go, it in return does us a favor by providing such a nutritional seed, fiber, and nutraceutical values at this time. So, we've learned so much about the crop in a short period of time. And again, we just need to make sure that information filters down to the growers. And
you do that so well. You and the whole team at HGI, Hemp Genetics International, and HPS, Hemp Production Services, we've learned to turn them into their acronyms. You present, and I've had you Skyping in for years now to my educational events. You're larger than life. Everyone gets to ask you questions live, and yet there you are in Manitoba or wherever you are in the world presenting. And of course, you fly all over to be physically present. And I know you work with certainly institutions of higher education throughout the United States, Cornell right here in New York, University of Kentucky, and so many others. And of course, the biggest drumbeat that you always and everyone in your organizations repeat is field selection, seed selection, agronomic practices. It starts with the seed, and it starts with the field that you're growing in, and the education that you put out around that is just so invaluable. And that is, I think, also a wonderful segue for us now then to talk a bit about hemp production services, which is also works with farmers and then moves into processing. And of course, hemp production services has a great motto, from our fields to your brand. So tell us a little bit about what Hemp Production Services does and the connections that it continues to make with the farmers outside of the genetics.
So essentially, we're involved with, obviously the genetics is the first part of, with hemp genetics. And then naturally farmers need a place to market their product. And so we have a sister company called Hemp Production Services, where we process hemp seed into hulled hemp hearts. Dehulled, I guess, is the proper word. We'll press the seed for hemp oil, cold pressed hemp oil, and then from the meal that's left from that, we'll provide or manufacture or process a protein powder from that for human consumption. So the objective, of course, with hemp production services is to, again, make sure that farmers are as successful as they can be. So harvesting at the proper time, how to handle the seed at a specific time, and making sure that the farmers are aware that there is very little processing done to the plant itself. And so it definitely has to start at the farm, because we want to make sure that we have a safe, high quality food product. And for that matter, that the same goes for whether you're growing for fiber or for CBD quality, and for on the CBD side, you have to realize that it is going to be a food product. So handling your crop of hemp is much different than handling, say, a wheat crop or a soybean crop, where there's going to be a process in there that has a more substantiated kill stop to kill any pathogens. And so we need to make sure that we work closely with farmers and to guide them in how to successfully provide this great quality product for human consumption.
And it most certainly is an art. In fact, as you know, because we work closely at Colorado Hemp Works, a grain processing facility that I have the pleasure and privilege of being a part owner in, and we work very closely with Hemp Production Services. And in America is coming up to speed with meeting those types of specs, and it's a challenge to watch all of that happen. And in Canada, of course, there is such already an expertise in so many ways from some of the more experienced farmers. And so we need to get American farmers up to speed on how to prepare, store, transport, even harvest, as we know, the breaking of the hulls and making new genetics, so that when the seeds are harvested, the hulls won't crack, which of course will then damage the integrity of the seed and make it go rancid. When we talk about the nutritional profile of the unique and dense nutritious profile of the hemp seed, it doesn't come without a cost. It's as tough as that stalk is, the seed is fragile. And so it's fantastic to watch all of this unfolding. What are some things also that you see in the future? I know for HPS or for HGI, I know that one of the products that Hemp Production Services has added in the last year or so, I believe, are the toasted hemp seeds. So you do oil, different protein powders, hulled seeds, seeds with the hulls, and toasted hemp seeds. Am I missing anything there, and anything that you're thinking about for the future that you can share with the public, as it were?
Sure. No, I think we continually look at all aspects of the plant. And so, we're currently concentrating on the food side of things with regards to with seed, but we're certainly interested in CBD production. As you mentioned, it was only August of last summer when we first became, available or legal to play with flowering parts, and so we're sort of gently getting into that part of production, I would say, with different methods here in Canada that are somewhat different than the U.S. But it's also any time that we can add value on the farmer side of the table, it's something that we're interested in, and so we just want to make sure that what we provide as far as a requirement or guidance, that we kind of have things figured out before we walk before we can run, I guess, essentially. So we're continually looking at all avenues and value adding to the plant and to the crop, and so nothing seems to be out of the realm of investigation with this crop. And that's the exciting part of the crop, is that it has so many different opportunities that the challenge occasionally is to stay focused on one, and that's kind of what we're trying to do currently, making sure that the food product aspect is stable, and then move on to perhaps some other opportunities.
And, again, such a unique team, experienced in agriculture, experienced in hemp, patient. I happen to know you find women and gentlemen on a personal level. So patient, grounded, family-oriented, community people. And you got together and formed these companies with basically a team of so many level heads. It's ideal. And we don't see that very often. Could you share with the listeners some of the common mistakes that you see in folks trying to get into hemp? And I know it's a big world, so let's narrow it down into hemp food production, let's say, or the hemp nutrition, or even hemp genetics businesses. What are some common mistakes that you see as this revolution sort of rushes to everyone's consciousness in North America?
I would say with any new crop, processing and having a home for what you grow is one of the biggest, I would say, flags that needs to be raised. There's a lot of people that want to perhaps grow hemp to get some of the experience without really finding out what they're going to do with the crop after the fact. So I do get phone calls where someone will say, I would like to grow hemp. And so one of the return questions I have is, what end use market are you gearing for? And sometimes I occasionally do get the answer of, well, I'm not really sure. I just want to grow hemp because everybody's growing hemp, and that's a cool thing to do these days. But so try to talk them down a bit, make sure that they have an end use market for their product, and in doing so, making sure that they do a good job again on the quality side of things. I think that's of my presentation, that's something that I continually overstate, I guess, is making sure that quality, because we do have some other product that comes in overseas, and in my mind, the North American farmer is one of the best farmers in the world, if not the best farmers in the world, producing high quality, very good products, whether it's traditional grains or hemp. And so to maintain our place in the marketplace and in the world, we have to make sure that we continue to beat that drum with regards to making sure that quality is a factor. So really, I think that's the biggest issue is just making sure you have a home for your crop, and then how to align yourself with someone that can provide you with the assistance to grow it successfully. And not to say that we have the answers for every location, but we can certainly discuss what the issues are and what is going to arise from growing the crop, and then finding out what you have for equipment and logistics and everything else to help make sure that you're successful. We're very fortunate in Western Canada here, because much of the infrastructure that's in place on farms has been put in place for our other cash crop of canola. So making sure that you have the proper type of bin with aeration for reducing microbial load or minimizing microbial load. All of these things we have in place in Western Canada. In certain areas of the U.S., it may not be as readily available, so there has to be some ingenuity and how are we going to address the situation of, say, harvesting at a higher grain moisture than normal. So just, aligning yourself with people you can trust to help get to the finish line and get there successfully.
Such important insight. And let's talk for a moment about the conversation around conventional hemp farming versus organic hemp farming. Whether it's if you want to sort of dissect the conversations in general, or certainly if you would be willing to share your thoughts on that subject, because we see, of course, that organic hemp grows for a prettier penny than conventionally grown hemp. And what is the real difference? And that may be a regional difference, but in general, what are your thoughts? What could we share around that conversation for the listeners?
I mean, both conventional and organic are system-based approaches, and I would suggest that organic is it's often described as playing a game of chess where some conventional farms might be checkers. So you really, it doesn't mean that it cannot be a science-based decision or science-based decisions can't be made. There's, as we mentioned earlier, the crop is definitely a hungry crop. How can we make sure that the nutrients are there for hemp, both in the conventional and also on the organic side of things? So, as we said, proper crop rotation, utilizing animal manure, a number of these different things, and always, once again, keeping in mind about quality and food safety. So I think there's excellent opportunity on both ends of the scale, both for conventional and organic, and it's the same spiel, I guess you could say, is that you just have to make sure that you understand what the crop can give you as an advantage, and then what are some of the issues that you have to keep in mind as far as, let's just say, weed control in organic. There's a lot of misinformation, I guess, out there that says that hemp can kill weeds, which is not quite true. So you still have to control weeds and give hemp the advantage that it needs to suppress weeds. It will certainly do a job suppressing weeds, but you have to still give the plant the advantage over some traditional weeds, and it can compete very readily. But if not given that chance, you could be in for a disaster. So there's subtleties like that, and that's not even really that subtle, I guess, but those types of issues you have to make sure are addressed prior to planting the crop in both of those situations.
Indeed, and thank you for that. And I also noticed the Environmental Protection Agency here in the U.S. had a public comment period. There were 10 pesticides that, and many of which one of which was just neem oil, and many of which included neem oil and some other things that they were looking to approve for hemp. Are there any approved pesticides in Canada for hemp?
Yeah, on the herbicide side of things, we have minor use registration on one or two different products. One is a pre-seed product, one is an in-crop spray, and then we also have some grassy weed control options also that are on the registered list. So we do have that, and it obviously helps. It's more tools in a farmer's toolbox, and helps grow the crop much more successfully.
And could you let us know some of the differences or things for American consumers or consumers around the globe to be concerned with when we look at hemp seed for human consumption that is now coming out of China? Now, they're the leaders in textiles, clearly, in hemp textiles, and other aspects of hemp, but we don't normally think of things for human consumption coming out of China. Could you tell us what some of those differences may be in the quality of that food product based versus food products coming out of Canada, the European Union, and certainly the United States?
Well, I think what North America has embraced lately is actually just traceability, and our company takes that extremely serious also. So I can take a look at a bag of our hemp hearts, take a look at what the lot code that identifies, where it was grown, and just with our direct communication with the farmers, I could probably tell you what crop was grown 3 years previous to hemp being grown there. And so I think that's the most important thing, without, getting into, I guess, a lot of detail with other countries. But traceability, knowing where your food product comes from, is very important, I think, for the North American consumer. And that's one of the things that's provided by North American processed grain, essentially. And it's in my mind, that's it's an important part of again, keeping the family safe and making sure that you know exactly where your food comes from.
And we have such a great relationship, the United States with Canada. I really see us as a joint force here, although I don't even like to use those words, as a joint effort to work together to deliver this crop in all of its healthy and beneficial ways to the rest of the globe. How are some ways that you can see Canada and the United States working together as a coalition, or working together strategically to enrich our countries, stimulate our mutual economies, create jobs, and continue to deliver on the promise of this versatile, valuable hemp crop?
Yeah, I guess it's just, I continue to reiterate, but standards, working together on food standards, working together, we call them IR4 projects on herbicides. So instead of having, initially as the U.S., gears up, and of course has such an ability to produce any crop in such vast amounts. But working together to make sure that the value chain, that everybody in the value chain, I guess, is an important plays an important role and is financially successful, to make sure that the crop can thrive and can be processed and delivered to consumers in a good manner. There's no doubt there'll be some headbutting also. Canada has established itself as a world leader in the food side of things. The U.S. has the opportunity to challenge that, and I'm not naive enough to say that we aren't somewhat concerned about that. But at the same time, I think the bottom line is that we see the value, and together as we move forward, the consumer awareness, again, removing a lot of the stigma with people thinking that if you ate a handful of hemp hearts that you would fail a drug test. All of this stuff is important in a united message, and research and clinical studies that help solidify what the anecdotal evidence is showing is going to be critical. So I think in that manner, together we can make a difference for sure.
It's fantastic. I cannot personally thank you enough for all that you share through all of my educational efforts, all of the many conferences that I'm involved with, and seminars and educational opportunities throughout the United States and, in fact, the globe, that you are such an integral part of. A tireless warrior out there, not only to advance the crop in meaningful, physical ways through genetics, through the processing of the grain, through the teaching of the farmers, but in sharing the information and working with these institutions of higher education. You are truly a hero of hemp heroes, Jeff, and it's a real honor to have you on today. Thank you for everything you do, and thank you for being with us on Hemp Barons today.
It is always a pleasure speaking with you, Joy. So all the best to you, and thank you so much. You're making me blush here. It's just it's great. But and thank you for all that you do, for sure.
An honor and a pleasure, brother. Until next time, and please send my highest to you, yours, and everyone at the Hemp Production Services and Hemp Genetics International team.
Will do. Thanks again, Joy.